All right. Good morning, everyone, and hello once again. Welcome back to our Dental Reprocessing and Infection Control educational event. I'm Brett Norton from Beyond Clean. And before we get started with this next presentation, I'd like to call everyone's attention to the features on your screen. All of the windows that you see are movable, so feel free to shrink, enlarge, or move them around to make your event experience fit to your preferences. On the lower left, you will see a Q&A window. Throughout each presentation, we really do encourage you to send in your questions for the speakers to answer during our Q&A session. And we may also be able to fit those in during the session, but most likely at the end. In the upper right, you will see a resources window where you'll find additional resources to download and access that are provided to you by our event sponsor. Our next speaker, Amanda Hill, likes to describe her career in dental hygiene as an adventure. She has traveled the world and has had the opportunity to experience dentistry, practice, and education all over the world. As an industry educator and consultant, Amanda strives to make topics in dentistry accurate, accessible, and fun. She is also a speaker, award-winning author, and host of the Your Dental Top 5 podcast. Suction lines are essential in dentistry. So how does one ensure these lines are properly cleaned and maintained for maximum efficiency, effectiveness, and safety? Today, Amanda is going to identify the dangers lurking in your dental suction and water lines. She will also provide key insights for proper care and maintenance in order to keep patients and clinicians safe. This session is brought to you by Aerosol Assist, ProEdge Dental Water Labs, and Air Techniques by Monarch. Get ready to discover how you can be the line leader in your practice, and let's welcome Amanda.
Hello, thank you so much. Now, didn't we all like always want to be the line leader when we were kids? I know I did. So today we are going to talk about learning your lines. And if this is something that you didn't know about, I don't want you to feel bad because I didn't know about any of this until about 5 years ago. I went to a CE, Louis DePaula gave us our OSHA infection control update, and he mentioned water lines. And I was like, water lines, what? I have to do what with water lines? Wait, I can kill people with water lines? And I had no idea. And I went back to my office the next day and said, hey, are we doing anything with our water lines? And they said, wait, what do you mean? What are we doing? And they had no idea. So that really started on my water line journey. And in fact, I will tell you that not only did I sort of start that journey then, but I am still learning. These are actual pictures from 3 weeks ago in my own office. So we'll talk more about what this means, but this is a waterline test in which one of our operatories just recently failed. And this is a picture which we'll go through of clogged suction lines, which is again in my own operatory. So this is a continually learning process. So hop on board and continue to be a learner with me. So there's all these lines in our dental unit operatory, and we have water lines and we have suction lines, and they really get confused. I actually started only talking about water lines, and then people started asking me so many questions about suction lines, and I was like, oh no, I don't know about those. And I decided, well, darn it all, I guess I should know about them. So that's what then brought me to kind of diving into that. And so that first picture that we just saw had the lines looking all nice and pretty and straight. But we all know that this is really what the dental unit water line, or all the lines look like in our operatory. They're tangled, they're messy, you trip over them. And so we need to know how to take care of them. So we will, by the end of this presentation, you will be a line leader with me. This is actually a picture of my daughter, who's now a senior in high school, and she would die 1,000 deaths if she knew that I was showing this picture of her. But I really feel like she looks like a sassy line leader, sort of like I felt like in the first grade when I got to be the line leader. So our objectives today are to understand the importance of clean dental unit water lines, define the steps needed to pass the test, formulate an effective protocol to maximize your suction lines, and discuss products. So we will go through lots of different products on the market that will help you be able to head back to the op on Monday and know what you want to implement and know what you want to order. So first, we're going to dive into water. So I'm going to kind of separate these two into two sections because I don't want you to get confused. Like I said, everybody's confusing these like, oh yeah, I shock my suction lines, or oh yeah, and so anyway, we're going to separate the two. So we're going to start off with water. So why do we test water? Why does it matter? I don't know about you guys. I've been a hygienist for over 25 years and been in the dental industry for almost 30. And I really didn't know anything about water, like I said, until about 5 years ago. And so we are testing water because there's actually biofilm that's growing in those lines. So just like the biofilm that's in our patients' periodontal pockets, just like the biofilm that, grows all in different places, it is in our dental unit water lines. And that biofilm can actually affect our patients' health. So it's really important that we make sure that we're keeping these things clean and safe. And not only can it affect our patients' health, but it can affect our health. And we often don't think of ourselves. As healthcare providers, we like to really just be concerned about our patients. And then the last thing is the CDC, the FDA, OSHA, a whole alphabet of groups say that we have to be taking care of our dental unit water lines. So it's time to get on board if you're not on board already. So why is there biofilm in our dental unit water lines, right? We understand why there's biofilm in our patients' pockets, right? It's that nice warm place that just, that bacteria likes to incubate and it, totally proliferates and it has all its little biofilm babies. Well, it's kind of the same thing in our dental unit water lines. So there's a high surface area to water flow ratio. And what that means is when you think about your dental unit water lines, they're tiny. It's this tiny little tube, right? And so that water is able to touch the edges of all of the tube, as opposed to like the pipes that come into your house, they're big. And so water is able to freely flow without all of it touching the sides. So since it's all touching the sides, it's able to then leave deposits and grow biofilm. So that microbiofilm loves that small tubing, just like it loves that nice warm periodontal pocket. It's just the perfect space for it. This is a fascinating study that Barbeau and group did back in 1996. 96, right? I mean, we should have been knowing about this for a long time. But they did a study where they took brand new dental unit water lines. So a brand new office just got built, spanking new lines. And in 5 days, so we're talking Monday to Friday. I don't actually know if those were the days, but Monday to Friday, we'll say. And by Friday, the CFUs, the colony forming units, the biofilm in those lines had already reached 200,000 colony forming units, and safe drinking water is 500 colony forming units. And that was in 5 days in brand new lines. And so the reason I really think this study is important is because as a hygienist, or as a lecturer on water, a lot of people say, well, my office is pretty new. I don't think we really need to worry about this yet. And you know what? I don't even care if your office is a day old. You're already growing biofilm. And so it's really important that we pay attention to that. And, you can see these nice, gross, ucky pictures down here in the lower right-hand corner. You can see that, the funny brown stuff. And once upon a time, that stuff would come out of my lines, and I didn't know what it was. I was like, oh, there must have been something in the line. And now I know that was biofilm. Whoops, I could be making people sick. So what is in this stuff? There's lots of different things in that biofilm. The three that we're concerned about are the three that we have history of patients being affected by are Pseudomonas aeruginosa, non-tuberculous mycobacterium, and the Legionella species. And so those have been shown to actually cause harm. But there's a ton of other stuff in there too. So these are stories of patients. So in Rome, Italy, we know that a woman died of Legionnaires, and it was directly traced back to 2 visits to her dental office. And then in Atlanta, Georgia, in 2015, 30 children were affected by Mycobacterium abscessus. And then in Anaheim, somewhere between 70 and 200 children, we'll find out soon, were affected in 2016, again by Mycobacterium abscessus. And then this is the newest case that just came out in Caracas, Venezuela. 3 patients had a severe infection with Pseudomonas. And interestingly enough, the government in Venezuela decided to start testing all the dental offices in Caracas and Quito. And in that, they discovered that 76% of dental offices had failing dental unit water lines and had Pseudomonas well above any safe level. 76% of the offices in their country failed. So if you're thinking, well, I've been doing this for a really long time and I haven't made anybody sick, and I want you to stick this little girl, Mimi Morales, in your head. So Mimi was affected in the Anaheim outbreak. She went in for a routine pulpotomy, a baby root canal. She developed a serious infection in her mouth. She had part of her jaw removed. She was hospitalized for more than a month. She was on heavy doses of antibiotics. And so this was this affected this little girl. with just dental unit water lines, right, that weren't treated and maintained properly. This is a fascinating kind of layout of the different sort of what happened in the Anaheim case. So we know at least 71 children were affected. We think it's actually up to 200 between the ages of 2 and 11. 99% of those children required hospitalization and surgical debridement. This is the big one. This is the one I want you to stick in your head. So the day, how long it took for these patients to be affected by this Mycobacterium abscessus was between 1 day, so they had the procedure, they were sick 1 day later, to 409 days later. So this kid, 409 days later starts to develop this infection. And the only reason I believe that they were able to kind of trace it back is because this was such a huge outbreak. So they already sort of knew to look for it. But you think, and I think kind of back like, well, at least in my 30 years of not really taking care of dental unit water lines, I've never made anybody sick. But all I can say with confidence now is I don't know that I made anyone sick. It's sort of like that, you get that stomach bug, right? And you're like, was it the Thai food that I ate? Did I pick it up because I touched a card at Target and then touched my own face? Did I get it from my kid from daycare? You can't trace it back. I have a feeling that we probably have been affecting patients more than we know. We just haven't traced it back. And now we're getting much better about contact tracing. And so this is going to become a big deal. Talk about becoming a big deal. So the Anaheim case is finally set to go to court. February 14th, 2022, 202 lawsuits that have been filed will go to their Orange County Superior Court. And this is predicted to be the largest payout in dentistry ever. This is something that our patients are going to hear about. So if you don't already have a dental unit waterline protocol, now is the time. So that way, come February or March or whenever this case finally settles out, and your patients say, hey, I saw this thing on CNN or I saw this on my local news. Do you guys take care of your water lines? You can confidently say, of course we do. Would you like to see our waterline logs? Let me show you how we take care of you and why we care. So this is going to be a big deal. The Atlanta case will go to trial just after Anaheim. They're sort of waiting, I think, for the results to so they have precedent. And I was able to talk to that lawyer in Atlanta, Drew Hill, no relation. And he is representing 11 of the families. And the waterline test, their waterline test came back at 91,000 colony forming units. And we said safe water is 500 colony forming units. So that's kind of a big deal. So we care about our patients' health, right? And so we've seen that the dental unit water lines can affect our patients, but it can affect our health too. And we forget about ourselves. And so, COVID really brought this concept of aerosols to light, right? We sort of ignored them for a million years. But interestingly enough, Kumar and his group in 2020 did a study called Demystifying the Mist. And they looked at the sources of microbial bioload in dental aerosols. So what's floating in our dental unit operatory, right? We got really concerned about it. We brought in all these really cool machines that sucked up aerosols and did all these things. And you know what we learned? We learned that the vast majority, maybe up to 95% of those aerosols in our operatory are actually coming from our dental unit water lines, not aerosolized saliva. So it's really important that we think about what's in those water lines, because that's for 8 hours, for 9 hours, for 10 hours. That's what we're inhaling as well. And so it's really important that we take care of that. So what are we breathing? A 1998 study showed that dental professionals have the highest prevalence of Legionella antibodies. I'm sure that's coming from our dental unit water lines. Exposure to contaminated dental procedure water could lead to exacerbation of asthma and other respiratory conditions. I did read one study once that said the one reason why patients or why staff members miss work in the dental office is for upper respiratory infections. Maybe that's our water lines. A 2021 study showed that dental office staff pose a significant risk for the inhalation of Legionella. But I sort of find this study to be a little bit moot, because once we take care of our water lines, we don't have to worry about this anymore. So we don't have to worry about this one because we know what to do, because we're line leaders. So if it's not enough for your patients' health, your health, this whole alphabet of organizations tell us that we have to take care of our dental unit water lines. So this is a good map of the CDC guidelines for dental unit water lines. And really what it's showing is that different states have adopted sort of different laws. So if it's in that sort of lighter blue, it is required because your state has accepted the CDC guidelines saying that you have to test your dental unit water lines. If it's in that medium blue, it hasn't been determined yet. And I want you to notice that both California and Georgia, the two places where those court cases are in that medium blue. I can guarantee you that neither one of those dental offices will get away with saying, well, it's not required, because we're still required to have a safe dental visit for all of our patients. We're still required to have a standard of care. So at some point, I would love to see all of these the same color, just that nice light blue, that we know that everyone understands how to take care of their dental unit water lines. So what do we have to do? How do we take care of it? You know why, right? You got it. You're convinced. You're like, all right, Amanda, I'm going to do this. How do I take care of this? We have to shock, test, treat, and maintain. So shocking, what is shocking? Shocking is using a really strong disinfectant to really rid our dental unit water lines of any biofilm. So you always want to shock before the initial use of any treatment. So if you're changing, if you hear this lecture today and you go, oh, I didn't even know about that product, I want to change products, you want to do a shock first, because sometimes different products don't play well together, sort of like making chemistry. And so you actually might encourage the growth of more biofilm if you're switching back and forth between products. You want to shock typically at least once a quarter. Not everybody does this, but I have found in my own practice that if we go, you know what, we passed, we really don't need to shock, the next time we fail. Shocking really helps kind of clear those lines out. And you always want to shock when your waterline test reveals 200 CFUs or more. And I know you're saying, wait, Amanda, you said 500 CFUs is drinking water safe. Absolutely. But once you get to 200 CFUs, it's sort of like that party that you had in high school where you're only invited 10 friends, and then 20 showed up, and then 20 became 40, and then 40 became 80, and you really had to get your really strong, burly friends to kick people out of your house. I don't know, did that happen to anybody else? Totally happened to me. Don't tell my mom. I'm actually at her house right now presenting this. Hopefully she didn't hear. But once you get up to 200 colony forming units, they're going to start to grow really fast. So you need to get on top of it. So how do we shock? You're welcome to take a screenshot of this, and it's easy to Google how to do a bleach shock. It's one of the fastest shocks, but a lot of people have issues with using bleach on their equipment. You want to check your IFUs to see whether you can use bleach or not. Recently, when my office failed, I did a bleach shock because you can do it in about 20 minutes. We'll talk about other products that take a little bit longer. But really what you want to make sure that you're doing when you're shocking is that you're shocking every single line that has water. So that means your power scaler, your air polisher, your air water syringe, any handpiece, tubes that have water in them. You want to make sure that you're shocking all of them, because they all will have biofilm. And even a line that maybe you don't use very often, actually especially a line that you don't use very often, because if that water gets to sit in there, that's when the biofilm party really happens. It goes from like a party to a rave in a hot second. So you want to go ahead and let that shock treatment enter your lines, and then follow those instructions for use for how long it's supposed to sit. With bleach, it's no more than 10 minutes. And if you do choose to use bleach, make sure that you use a regular bleach and not a splashed-less bleach. Splashed-less bleach does not work. I don't know why, but they must put something in it. So make sure you pay attention to that. So these are different shock products. Bleach, like I said, is a really fast one if your instructions for use say you can use it. Liquid Ultra is the strongest. So if you were in a position where your lines keep failing, Liquid Ultra is a great one to turn to. You have to do it over a period of time. A couple days in a row, you're flushing it through, and so it takes a little longer. Monarch has a great product that you can use as a regular maintenance and a shock. And Citrasil is another one. There's lots of other products out there. But you need to make sure that you're using a product and you're using it according to its instructions for use. No bleach in your suction lines. We'll get to that in a minute, but I always like to say it. So if you're shocking with bleach, don't ever pour it down your suction lines. Remember that. Okay, so we've shocked our lines. We've picked a product. We're using those instructions for use. We are shocking our lines. Now we need to test them to make sure that our shock worked, right? So we can do in-office testing and mail-in testing, but the only way to know if your shock worked, if your lines are clean, is testing. I think that's the thing I love most about water lines, is that it doesn't matter what product you use, you have to test it. So, oh my gosh, if you're convinced coconut oil is going to work, I don't think it's going to work. But if you're convinced coconut oil is going to work, test and see whether it does the job. So I'm not suggesting using coconut oil, by the way. But you really want to test every 90 days once you're on a good system. So my operatory in my dental office that failed recently, I'm actually shocked. I'll test again in a month, and we need to pass for 2 consecutive months, and then we'll move back to a 3-month program. And the reason that is once you've failed, you know that the biofilm is there. And like we talked about, that party that went from a biofilm party to a biofilm rave happens really fast. So collecting a sample is super easy, and you can do pooled samples. Pooled samples is a great way to save money, whether you're doing an in-office or you're doing a mail-in test. But when you do a pooled sample, you only want to do it from one operatory, so not from your entire office. So what I do is I take one of those tests, I go into one operatory, I pour a little bit from my air water syringe, a little bit from my power scaler, and a little bit from my air polisher. And then that's my sample. In my dentist op, I'll do a little bit from his air water syringe, a little bit from my assistant's air water syringe, a little bit from, his handpiece, and then that's my sample. It's a great way to save money. And then if you fail, like that operatory we had that recently that failed, I did from there go ahead and test everything individually to figure out what was failing. And super hint, the one that typically fails is your power scaler or your air polisher. Just has a really long line, and they're really teeny tiny lines, so they fail the most often. So in-office testing. In-office testing is 100% confidential. So the very first time that I ever did dental unit water lines, I did in-office testing because I knew we were going to fail. Like, it was a 50-year-old office, and they'd never tested before. So I was like, oh, we're totally going to fail. So I shocked, tested, totally failed. So it's confidential. So that's what we did. But it is imprecise. And so you don't get an exact number of your CFUs. You're kind of guessing. But it's super economical. And since OSAP recommends that higher testing frequency, it's really convenient. And you get your results in 2 to 7 days, depending. So this is the ProEdge Quick Pass, which you can read in 2 days. And this is the AquaSafe, and that you can read in 5 to 7 days. Mail-in testing is really handy as well. It's a third-party verification. I really recommend that, if you're testing 4 times a year quarterly, that 3 of those you do in office, and once a year you do that mail-in third-party verification. Not only is it so great to show your patients when they're going to call after that lawsuit comes to the news, but it's a great way to just be able to show, if you ever had an inspection or something like that, that you are indeed doing your due diligence. And I will tell you that compliance specialists are telling me that this is one thing that boards are looking for. They're coming in and they're asking about your dental unit water lines, so make sure you're taking care of them. You get more precise results with a mail-in test. It does require overnight shipping, so it's more expensive than an in-office test, but you get a report emailed back to you, and darn it, I'll put that report up on your social media. Show patients what you're doing to take care of them. You do get your results in 1 to 7 days, depending on which method you pick. So these are a bunch of different methods that are out there. These 2 on the bottom it's a new technology called flow cytometry. So ProEdge has a system where you can mail it in, and it's actually really fascinating. You get your results back in 1 day. It actually takes them 20 minutes to run the test, and you get precise counts of actual bacteria that are in your lines as opposed to just growing bacteria, which is really fascinating. So what do you do if you fail? Like, I just recently failed, right? So try another shock product. Go back through, shock again. Check for dead legs. I talked about that a tiny bit, but a dead leg is a line that you just don't use very often. Maybe in your hygiene room, you have a line that you can hook a handpiece up to. Well, if it's something that you're never going to use, go ahead and have your tech go ahead and cap that off and dry that out. Because if the biofilm can grow in there, then it could run to other lines, and it'll really start to affect your water lines. You want to check your source water. Some people use a distiller because they're using that for their autoclave. Oftentimes those distillers actually have really high CFU counts because they also have the teeny tiny tubing. And so it could be your source water. So you're putting in bad water into your dental unit water lines. And of course, then that's leading to more biofilm. And then the last one is to check your filters. You might say, filters? What do you mean filters? Well, oh my goodness. So that little UFO filter that you see there on the left is something that goes into your power scaler. And when I started this waterline journey, I found mine on my power scaler, and it was black. It was filled with biofilm and bacteria. I had no idea. It was in my IFUs. I just never read them. So make sure you check your filters. That silver filter in the middle, that was the filter actually from Cabrillo College. They failed their dental unit waterline test, and they found some hidden filters in the junction box of their chair that were black and filled with biofilm. So check that if you're having trouble. Okay, so we have shocked, we have tested. Now we're going to treat ourselves because we passed, whoop, whoop, and we're going to treat our dental unit waterlines. So some people say, well, I shock, so do I have to do I have to treat? Or some people are like, no, we use that straw thing, so we don't have to do anything. We don't have to do that shocking part. Actually, you have to do both. And I like to liken it to our dental hygiene visits, right? So we have our perio maintenance visit. We bring our patient in and we really get in there with our power scaler, maybe our subgingival air polisher. We're really disrupting that biofilm. But then I don't tell my patient, oh, you don't have to brush, I'll see you in 3 months. No, I give my patient oral hygiene instructions so they can keep that biofilm load low. The same thing for our dental unit water lines. We have to be doing both. Because these maintenance products that we'll talk about in a minute are good, but they're not perfect and they fail. So you can see in this chart, it shows that tablets with a separate shock pass 88% of the time. But when you go down to just tablets and that's it, it becomes 77%. Straws and cartridges, 72%. So anyway, they all have some kind of failure rate. Even I know what I'm doing and mine failed. So it happens. That biofilm is tricky. So tablets, if you choose to use a tablet, you're going to determine the size of your bottle. That's a picture of the bottle that we have in my operatory. And you can pop one tablet in, you fill it up with water, you let it effervesce, then you screw it on, and then you have that treated water. There's lots of different products on the market that work really well. But again, stick with one product. Don't go back and forth between two products because they work differently, and then you're just doing chemistry on your lines. It's not a good idea. So straws and cartridges. The biggest thing I want to say about a straw is they are super handy and maintenance free, but they are not a get out of jail free card. I hear a lot of people say, we use a straw. So the rep said that we don't have to test for a year. I got to tell you, it's not true. That's what we're using as a straw, and it failed. So you still need to be making sure that you are testing your dental unit water lines. So you want to put that straw in and then read those instructions for use. Some of them have you actually dump your bottle out every day and dry the straw. Some of them you can leave on. It just depends. But make sure you set a note in your appointment book for when it's time to change the straw, or when you fail a test, you'll find out. So these are a bunch of different straws that are on the market. One really important thing to know, though, if you are using a straw, is you have to have a dummy straw when you shock. You do not want to draw any shock solution through your straw or you would destroy it. It happened in my clinical office. Our front desk person decided she was going to help shock lines, and she ran a shock through the straws, and we had to throw all the straws away. Those straws are not cheap, so it was a really expensive lesson. You can email ProEdge. You can go on their website. They will send you a free dummy straw. I have a bunch of dummy straws. You just do that, and then you can put your straw back on after you've done shocking. So why do straws fail? They have a whatever's in them, whether it's iodine or silver, and they've discovered that after really about 7 to 8 months, they tend to dip below 1 part per million, which is where it needs to be. And so it's really important that you make sure that your straw is doing its job. It's interesting, ProEdge just came out with a new straw called Blue Tube. Hang on, I can go backwards and show it to you. You can see it in the left-hand side there. And it's actually 2 straws, and you change it every 6 months as opposed to once a year. And it's because they were finding that straws were failing around the 7 to 8 month mark, which is what I found in my office. Ours failed right about that 8 month mark. So a year is a long time for that straw to do its job. So maybe that 6 month straw might be the way of the future. Liquids are another great option for taking care of your dental unit water lines, but their instructions for use vary greatly. So make sure that you read those IFUs closely. There's a bunch of different products on the market that do a great job keeping your dental unit water lines clean. But again, we have to test it. It doesn't matter. The biggest thing is that you have to document what you're doing, much like our dental unit water lines, or much like our patient chart. If you didn't write it down, it didn't actually happen. So make sure that you have a log. Make sure in your compliance manual that you keep a line. Appoint a waterline warrior. It doesn't even have to be your infection control coordinator. It can be somebody else that's interested about it, really likes that testing part. I mean, I just love it. It's the funnest thing to do because you actually feel super productive and you get your tests, and I like to read them. So find somebody in your office that's interesting and establish an SOP and stick to it. So flushing versus purging. This is something that I learned in hygiene school. We learned that, we're supposed to flush our lines every morning, but I learned that I was supposed to do it because one time my instructor had a spider crawl out of her air water syringe. So I thought we were flushing because of spiders. The truth is that's not it. So you want to flush in the morning for 1 to 2 minutes, all of your lines, and then you want to flush between patients for 20 to 30 seconds. And the reason that is any biofilm that has grown kind of right in that early, right where the patient would get it, you can kind of flush out and keep that water moving. Purging now is typically only recommended for extended absences, so between 2 weeks and more. And then if you're gone for more than 2 weeks, you want to make sure that then you're going to shock again. And the idea is that the biofilm has had too much time to hang out and grow. So often there's new information out there that says that if you leave treated water in your lines overnight or over the weekend, that it can continue to kill the biofilm as you go, so that you never really get your lines clean with purging. So you can leave that in your lines overnight or over the weekend. So different myths, and these are things that I hear all the time. We use distilled water, so we don't have to worry about this. Yes, you do. You still have to test with distilled water. You still have to treat with distilled water. In fact, distilled water doesn't have chlorine in it, so you actually might grow biofilm faster. The city water comes straight into our lines, and there's no way to shock. So you have a couple choices here. One is to retrofit your chairs with those bottles that I showed you. It really only costs about $100 a chair, which is what my office did. Or they do have inline central systems that can treat your water as it comes into your office. Those tend to fail a lot, and you don't have as much control. You actually have to have a rep come in to shock your lines when you fail. So those are a couple different options. I like the bottle one just because it gives me more control. But again, the instructions for use are your friend. You have to follow those. They're written for a reason. They're tested for a reason, so make sure you read them. Do I really have to test? I always get this question like, well, they don't say in my state I don't have to test. Yes, you have to test. CDC, OSHA, OSAP, ADA, FDA, ADHA, everybody says you have to test. This is fascinating. Nearly 1/3 of all dental unit water lines fail to meet CDC standards, less than 500 colony forming units. Mine failed. I know what I'm doing. Mine failed. Non-treated lines are likely to have 200 to 400 times greater than the CDC recommendations. And 61% of practices have at least one failed line. And the testing is the only way you know if it's working. That all came from John Molinari in 2018 in the white paper. So it's not just me saying this. You have to do it. Okay, so what do you have to do? We have to shock, test, and document, choose a maintenance product, and stick to the IFUs. Flush your lines at the beginning of the day and in between, retest quarterly and document, and then shock as needed or quarterly. All right, this is my dog, Yellow. She's our COVID dog, and we're going to switch from water lines to suction lines. I know we're moving fast. So suction. So this is what keeps us from drowning, right? So all the big talk of aerosols really, COVID really brought all that up. And the idea is that our suction lines can really help us keep those aerosols in zone 1. Now we know that 95% of those aerosols are our dental unit water lines, so we're not as afraid of them as we were before, right? Because if we have clean dental unit water lines, we know that we're not inhaling, too much bad stuff, but we still are. So let's make sure that our suction lines are performing optimally. So zone 1, right there at the mouth, is where we'd like to do that, and our suction can help us with that. So what everybody always wants to know is, okay, well, tell me what device to use, and I will totally use that device. So we're going to go through a study that talks about devices, but truthfully, your vacuum needs to be the thing that's working. So John Kamisi at the Medical University of South Carolina did an amazing study on 13 different setups of suction products. And I find this a fascinating study, and if you can find it, if you Google it, aerosol and spatter mitigation in dentistry, and it's a really great study to look at and spend more time with. They even talk about noise reduction. So we're going to fly through this fast, but they had a bunch of different setups. So one of them is a prototype, and it's not on the market yet, but rumor has it the CAO group will be putting it out soon. And that's in that upper left-hand corner. And it sort of had a mouth opener, like it held your mouth open, and then it had something kind of right below your chin that sucked in aerosols. Then in the upper right-hand corner, you see something called the aerosol away, which has 2 cups right by the person's face, and that sucks in aerosols. In the center there, you see Isovac or Isolite. And then in the lower left, you see the relief. And then in the lower right, you see the back station, which is one of those external units. Okay, so we're going to see how they did. So for spatter, that's droplets and things like that, right? So you can see the control was up at 54. Your regular HVE brought it down to 43. If you use a rubber dam and HVE, you got down to 35. That new prototype thing that I told you about that the CAO group should be putting out soon brought it all the way down to 13. When you add in another HVE, it was 6. Aerosol away, that was that cup thing on each side of their face, was 29. And then if you added HVE, went to 17. The Isovac, 32. Isovac with HVE was 28. The Relief was up there at 41. If you added in HVE, you got to 28. The VAC station at 8 millimeters or centimeters away, which if you don't know 8 centimeters is about 3 inches, was 11. Once you got to 15 inches, it was at 30. And then if you added some HVE, it actually went higher, which I thought was fascinating. Aerosols, though, this was the one I was super interested about, right? So what I thought was the most fascinating is they all did a pretty good job of controlling aerosols, with the exception of the Relief, which did not give us aerosol control. It was actually pretty high. And then the VAC station at 15 centimeters away, which is 6 inches away, actually created more aerosols. I was super curious about how these external vacuums work. So if you have them in the right zone, that 3 inches away, they work well. But if you have them a little too far away, they might actually be doing more damage. So placement is really important, right? We want that HVE to be as close to that aerosol generating device as possible so that we have optimal and suboptimal. As a hygienist without an assistant, I'm often in suboptimal range because I just can't do it. I can't keep it together. But I have really good news. If your vacuum is working effectively and efficiently, it doesn't matter if you have optimal placement or suboptimal placement. But that's a big if your vacuum is doing its job. So you can see here that if you have your flow rate, and we're going to talk about flow rate in a second, up at 7.1 all the way to 10.6, that there's not a big difference between whether you have it placed next to your device or slightly away from your device. However, if your flow rate is low, down at like 6.3, you're actually creating more aerosols with suboptimal. So what is flow rate? Okay, so we have flow rate and we have vacuum, and our suction lines need to do both. And what the flow rate does is that removes our aerosols, and what the vacuum does is that removes our liquids, and there needs to be room for both. I like to think about flow rate like a can of evaporated milk, and you can see these pictures here that I took. When you take one hole in your can of evaporated milk, it kind of drips out slowly, right? Because it has no airflow. But you pop that second hole in the top, and that air comes through, and it really lets that evaporated milk come out. When I explain this to my daughter, she's like, oh yeah, it's kind of like how you shotgun a beer. So evaporated milk, shotgunning a beer, whatever works in your brain, you need both because we want to take care of liquids and we want to take care of aerosols at the same time. And is there room for both of those? So a flow rate, an ideal flow rate, is at 7.1 SCFM, standard cubic feet per minute. Anything less is not enough to actually reduce particle emission. In Europe, the standard is 10.6. For some reason, we accept 7.1. I'm not quite sure why. So how do you know your flow rate, right? I mean, you put your thumb on there, and if it sucks, you're like, okay, it's good. But that's just vacuum. That's not flow rate. So I called in my friendly Air Technique reps, Robbie. He's my new best friend. And Robbie helped me check my flow rate. And so he has this cool handy dandy flow rate meter, and we checked it on my suction, my high speed. So initially my high speed came out at about, 7.6. So it was okay, right? But then when I turned on my co-hygienist HVE, so I had mine on and she had hers on, oh my gosh, we bottomed out at like 5. So our vacuum system is not set up for all of us to be using HVE. And come COVID, all of a sudden we're all using the HVE. So it's really important that we take care of our vacuum. So we'll get back to that. Robbie gave us lots of hints, and I'll tell you all the good tricks. So not only are we concerned about, are we controlling these aerosols, right? But we need to be concerned about patient safety when it comes to our suction devices. I promise this is me and the suction is off. I didn't really close my mouth on the suction tube. So I know enough about backflow. So we have suction adapters, right? And that's what we toggle those on and off all day long. And sometimes you notice they're really hard to toggle on and off. And I never really thought about it. I thought it was different brands. Oh my gosh, what I've learned is they are caked on with biofilm. This is actually from my office. You can see all the grossness that happened. I took them all apart. And I discovered all of this stuff inside. So this is actually the IFUs for my saliva ejector and HVE. And I'm not going to make you read these. It's way too many words. But the long and short of it is we're actually supposed to be taking these things apart. I've been doing hygiene for a really long time, and I've never taken one apart. There was a study done by the VA that said it takes 11 minutes to properly reprocess an HVE device between the taking it apart and the drying it and all of that stuff. I got to tell you, the first time I took all of them apart in my office, it took way more than 11 minutes. Some of them I had to soak in hot water for over a day just to get that biofilm to release because they are gross. So, and I know you're thinking, well, again, I've never made anybody sick. I'm going to say, well, we don't know, right? But we know about O-rings. We know our O-rings, like they fail all the darn time. And so you think about your HVE or, your adapter, and it has these little O-rings on it. So then if the O-ring breaks and you're not taking your thing apart, so you don't know this, then blood could actually be seeping through. And this is a fascinating study that Pat Pine did in RDH magazine, where she took 212 random samples of HVE adapters, right? She went in and she swabbed them outside and inside. 212, and only 4 surfaces passed out of 212. None of the actual adapters 100% passed. We are not getting these things clean. So when we're wiping these down with our Cavi wipe or whatever we're using, we're not getting them clean. We should be reprocessing these things. And who the heck has time for that? I don't know about you, but I do not have time for that. I have switched over to disposables now. I know, the poor planet. I'm really sorry, planet. But we are now using the disposable HVE and slow speed suction with the idea that I don't have time to take these things apart and reprocess them. And so it really is helping keep our patients safe. All of the disposable HVEs that we use, we use one by Dove Dental. They have built-in backflow preventers too, which is great because when we think about those inline backflow preventers, at some point they're going to fail, and there's no way to know if and when they fail. And so I really like these because I know that if my patient does decide to have a makeout session with Mr. Thirsty, the slow speed suction, I know that there's a backflow preventer in there that's keeping them safe. So one of the hard things, though, is to adapt to using high-speed suction HVE. I learned as a hygienist with just slow-speed suction, right? Just Mr. Thirsty. And that was doing the job, but we know that that is not doing the job. It is taking care of fluids, but not aerosols. And this is a great slide here that shows that when you have really good flow rate, you are controlling 100% or 99% of the aerosols, right? But when you're using a saliva ejector, your flow rate is down at 2.5 and you're controlling only 38% of the aerosols. So you're not doing it with just your saliva ejector. So if you're a hygienist like me and you're like, I don't have an assistant, I can't hold an HVE, I have found that a device like this, a wristband that holds the cord, has really helped me figure out how to juggle my HVE and my whatever I'm using, my polisher, my Cavitron or whatever. This one happens to be by Cortese. I really like it. But they make them and they help take that drag off the tubing, so it really helps. Hands-free suction is another great option. This is actually my dad for his perio maintenance visit, and I use Isovac a lot, especially with my air polisher is what I tend to use that with. I really like it. It really controls the aerosols well, shown by that Kamisi study. So another option, they have some other great devices that help capture some aerosols this way, so you can use your saliva ejector, but it hooks up to your HVE and it can capture some aerosols that way. This is another one by Aerosol Assist. And this is neat because you can autoclave that white device, and the studies show that it captures a pretty good amount of the aerosols. So that's another option as well. So none of this matters, though. No matter what device you use, it doesn't matter if your equipment doesn't work. So how do we take care of our equipment? What do we have to do? You have to be running your suction every day, and sometimes in between patients. If you have a really bloody procedure, you need to go ahead and grab your suction dispenser and run those lines. I'm a big fan of using a dispenser, and the reason that is because when I joined my current clinical office, I asked them, like, how do you guys do your suction? And they had an old gallon jug, and they were kind of doing the plunge and slurp, like, down and up and down and up. And really, that's super hard on your vacuum. It's not good for it. Like, you think about if you ever learned how to drive sick, you know, how your engine kind of sputtered back and forth, you're doing that to your vacuum. And vacuums are expensive, and they're getting harder to replace with all of our equipment shortage. So you want to make sure you're taking care of it. Monarch by Air Techniques makes a really cool dispenser that really, they have this great video that shows how it can clean the inside of the lines. That suction cleaner doesn't just go straight through, but it actually creates a vortex. And that you can do two rooms with one dispenser, which I really like. So you need to pick a good suction product. And this is really important, particularly with our amalgam separators. You want one that has a pH between 6 and 8, non-foaming, no chlorine, compliant with the EPA 2020 rule. You want it to be safe for patients, cost-effective, and have chelating agents. And which that means is it works with all kinds of water, hard water, soft water, really, you know, mineral water. It helps reduce those calcifications. You have to change your traps. These are actual pictures from my office. When I joined, they had not been changing the traps, and no wonder our suction didn't suck. So that was one of the first things that Robbie said we needed to do was you got to start running your suction lines every day, and you need to change your traps. So we did. And the big trap. You have a big trap by where your vacuum pump is, and it can get gross too. And here was ours. Like, it was caked on with stuff. Again, no wonder we didn't have very good suction. And you need to think about the filter on your amalgam separator. That's a new thing. You know, we haven't had amalgam separators for very long. It's really hard sometimes to tell when your amalgam separator is full. And if you get one of those LED flashlights you can see on the right there, it really will show you where that sediment line is and help you know when to change that trap. Ours got full in 7 months. They say 1 year. Ours was full in 7. So make sure that when you're changing your big trap, which could be once a month, according to your IFUs, that you're checking your amalgam separator. Just buy one of those LED flashlights on Amazon. So this is progress. This is super exciting. So the initial reading, if you remember, was 7.6 on my HVE. After 3 months of daily line cleaning and changing our traps, we got all the way up to 8.7. And then I changed our suction tubing, which was totally occluded with prophy paste and gross, and I think was 30 some odd years old. And I changed it to a lighter tubing, which was great for me with HVE. And we got all the way up to 9.1. So just by doing those things, we didn't have to buy a new vacuum, which my dentist was super happy about. We saved lots of money that way. So some common errors when we take care of our suction lines is that plunger slurp, right? Do we let it sit on the very top of the water? Do we push it down below the water? Highly recommend using a dispenser. And it just helps make sure everybody's doing it the same way, everybody's on the same page. Choosing the wrong product. The wrong product can actually damage the pipes that lead back to your suction line. So the wrong product can cause those pipes to bend and dip, and that causes more gross yuckiness and flow, and so it doesn't work very well. Not changing your traps. I mean, we learned that lesson at my office. You want to make sure that you're weekly changing those chair traps, and that once a month or every other month, twice a month, you are changing that big trap, and then checking on your amalgam separator trap as well. Not using the HVE, and I know hygienists, if you're out there listening to this, I know it's hard. Try a couple different ways. Try some of those handheld ways. Try a Cordy's bracelet, whatever you need to do, but you need to be taking care of your patients and yourself and using that HVE. And then hidden filters. Again, I talked about hidden filters with water lines. There can be hidden filters in your suction lines. I had a practice that I worked at a while ago, and we had a really stinky vacuum. We would turn it on Monday morning, all kind of run for the hills. And it turned out that we had a filter in a junction box of one of the rooms that was totally clogged and filled with sludge. So if you're really having issues, check all of those things before you go and buy a new vacuum. You'll save yourself a lot of time and money. So what do you have to do again? First thing is you want to check your airflow. So your airflow should ideally be between 7.1 and 10.6 SCFM. So your rep might have an airflow meter. I know for sure that your Air Techniques rep will come out. Even if you don't have any Air Techniques equipment, they'll come out and check your airflow for you. You want to set up a daily standard operating procedure. So just like your water lines, you want the whole team to understand how to take care of your water lines. It's the same for suction lines. These are both really important pieces of equipment. Think about it. If your suction goes down, what happens to your office that day? You're not working. So you want to clean your lines daily. Ideally, you want to do that from the farthest away from the vacuum to the closest away from the vacuum. Think about it like when you sweep your kitchen, right? when you sweep your kitchen, you make sure that you're, you don't start by the door and go backwards. So you want to make sure that you're trying to go farthest to closest, and that way it really cleans those lines out. You want to change those traps once a week and empty that vacuum trap once a month. You want to check your suction adapter IFUs. So if your adapter is really hard to turn on and off and hard to spin, I'm sure that's just because it's caked on with grossness. Go ahead and reprocess that, or consider using disposables. But even if you're reprocessing it once a day or once a week, at least you know that you're getting that clean. And you want to make sure that you're using your HVE. So congratulations, you are an official line leader with me. So we can be line leaders. And this is even more exciting. I have free goodies for you. So ProEdge, since ProEdge, Monarch, and Aerosol Assist are all sponsoring my speaking today. And ProEdge is offering you all a free quick pass. So to test your dental unit water lines, super handy, lots of fun. I've actually even used the quick pass to test the water on my airplane and the coffee maker in my hotel. So you can tell I'm a little obsessed about testing water. But if you just go to that website, you can get a free quick pass. Monarch will send you a free bottle of line cleaner to be able to start cleaning your suction lines. And then Aerosol Assist has a 10% off. So you can just hover your phone over that QR code and you can get straight into Aerosol Assist. So this is here's a bigger QR code if you need to get to that. And I promise I'll go back to that bonus slide again. But this kind of shows you those pictures about how that Aerosol Assist works. And then for ProEdge, if you go to that Quick Pass site, you can type in my name as an OSHA educator, infection control consultant, and you can get your free Quick Pass. So thank you, everyone, for hanging in there and becoming a line leader with me. And I'm certainly ready for any questions that might have popped up.
All right. Hey, Amanda, thanks. That was a great presentation and very engaging. It's, I think in the virtual world nowadays, it's always helpful to have somebody that can speak clearly and is good with, moving through the slides and everything. So really appreciate that. That was great.
Absolutely. I know I was moving fast. So if I went too fast for somebody, please let me know.
Yeah, I know. I think it was great. So, my expertise, or I would say not a full-blown expert, but my experience is on the chemical side with, reprocessing and also working with dentistry and various distributors and things like that, and educating them on chemicals and the varieties of chemicals that are used in dental offices. You talked about shocking. So yeah. What would you recommend? And also, as far as I'm not saying a brand specific, but there's the chemistry, right? And there are all different types of chemicals. There's the alcohols, there's the bleaches, and all of those can do harm to plastics, rubber, vinyl, any of that. And so what would you suggest? And also, does that strong chemistry break down the lines when you're shocking them? And how often would you have to replace them? And if there is an alternative to maintaining the longevity of those lines, what would you recommend?
So really what I would say is, if you've never shocked before, you're going to have to use a strong shock solution because that biofilm is thick and it is multi-layered and gross.
It's gross. Yep.
But if you are really great at maintaining your lines, you can use something that's a little less caustic, a little more earth friendly to be able to take care of that biofilm because it hasn't gotten to such a high load. Now, people, I am a big fan of bleach, but I follow the IFUs very closely. So with the bleach, you want to leave it in for no more than 10 minutes. And then you want to flush and flush and flush. Like I will flush entire 2 bottles full of just water to make sure that I'm not leaving behind any residual chemicals. And I would say the same thing with any shock product. It's really important that you follow those IFUs, and most of them have you do a really long flush at the end to make sure that you have cleared the lines. And that way, patients are ingesting things. But for me, I'm thinking really about those little O-rings and all those adapters and all those connections that really don't like those caustic chemicals. So if we can get it into the lines, it can do its job, and then we can get it out. Hopefully, it doesn't have that damage. We're not finding that. We're not seeing that. It's really rare that anyone replaces their water lines. I will say to really quick about suction lines, it's super cheap to change your suction lines, and you can do it all by yourself. I didn't mention that. I did it all by myself in my office, and it's an easy thing and cheap thing to do, because those get kind of occluded with all the stuff that you're sucking up.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great information. And, I think it's also a little bit more sensitive when you're talking, coastal regions, right? I think OSHA gets a little bit more picky when it comes to drainage and what kind of chemistry you're putting into your lines. So that's good information, and especially when it comes to flushing it through and maintaining, because it can be very expensive for sure.
It can be, and time consuming.
Yeah, exactly. And time is money, I guess, these days, right?
For sure.
So you mentioned the straws, and I know that you had suggested the frequency of change out, and I know you alluded to 6 months. Is there any other, I think it may be brand specific as far as the vendor is concerned, but if it's across the whole vendor spectrum, and if there's what would you recommend as far as frequency of changing, regardless of brand?
Well, the coolest thing that I love, and I mentioned this about water lines, is if you're testing quarterly, when your product has failed. So if after 3 months you're using a straw and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, we just failed that, that your product has stopped working. And so that's when you change your straw. It's kind of a cool thing. I think that's why I like it, because it's like it's so black and white. Like I joked about the coconut oil, totally a joke. Don't use coconut oil. But the idea meaning, like, you can try something if you're convinced it's going to work, and there's a way to test whether it's actually doing its job or not. So there is just the one company that has come out with that 6-month straw. Everybody else is still at a year. And some of them make it a year, no problem. So when I did my entire office and our straw was at a year, one of our ops totally passed. It was doing fine. The other 3 ops all failed. So and it's just the funny nature of biofilm. We don't fully understand why it does what it does and why it proliferates in some, places and not others. But the moment that your test comes back, and, whether it's a mail-in or whether it's that quick pass and you have all those little red dots, that's when all right, I guess we got to change that straw, or I guess we got to, kind of do another shock and figure out what's going on with our product. So, yeah, but they do fail.
Yeah. And I guess the message is clean your lines and make sure that you're doing it frequently, and you have a standard operating procedure and then
exactly.
You completely avoid that. Yeah. And speaking of biofilm, I always use the example of the dog bowls, right? That doesn't take very long throughout a week. Mm-hmm. And then you feel that gross film that builds up around the dog bowl. And you think about that kind of piling up in a tight line. It's not going to take very long at all.
No. And just that first study that I talked about, 5 days. It only took 5 days for 200,000 colony forming units to form in brand new lines. And so it's that fast. And it's just, once you get a little bit, it just goes. And so that's why you really have to stay on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. The second it starts is when it becomes a problem, and you don't want it to even start. So,
right, exactly.
So here's an interesting question. Is it possible to have a separator going to a dental water line?
Do you mean an amalgam separator?
Yes. Yep.
So an amalgam separator actually is connected to your suction line. And that's what pulls out your, that's what's supposed to hold your amalgam. So that way it doesn't go into your runoff. It tends to actually catch more prophy paste than anything else. But that's typically when you look at your filter, it's going to be filled with prophy paste more than it is any mercury or amalgam, depending on how many amalgams you're taking out. But yeah, so those are the separate lines. And that's where I talked about kind of that divide between what do I do with water lines? What do I do with suction lines? So that amalgam separator. They do have inline filters. There's a couple companies out there that have filters that filter the water that comes into your practice. And it can filter, if you're somebody that, has different metals that you don't want in water, you can certainly, put in a big fancy filter, just like you could put into your own house, to filter out different things to keep, to keep your water more pure. But that doesn't affect the biofilm growth at all, because the biofilm growth happens in the tubes. And so that's often why those central systems fail, because they live so far away from your dental tubing that they have a lot further to go. And so it's just even more opportunity for biofilm to grow. I think that was sort of maybe what they were asking.
Yeah, I think that, I was trying to interpret it as well. And to me, that's a great answer. That's, I think, exactly what they're asking. So one last question, and this can be a quick answer, but what role does the dental unit manufacturer play in recommending appropriate methods and equipment for the quality of water in a dental practice?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I actually have a slide, which I didn't put in here, that talks about all the different manufacturers. But, they should have a protocol. And a lot of them have now, thankfully, they're all coming on board and coming up with their protocol and what they recommend for their unit. In the beginning, they were just saying, whatever, follow a product, use a product. But now they're understanding that really they play a part in keeping these units safe. And I think as this court case comes out in February, this is going to become even more and more important. So hop on board if you're not already on board, because patients are going to ask.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, if you're selling a product and you're distributing a product, you need to know the processes. You need to know what it's used for. You need to be a source of education, and you also need to be a source of a resource for your hygienists and dentists to ask you questions. It's not just here's the product, like I was talking with Angie about earlier. It's you really do need to be more aware of the entire process and how it affects everyone in the office itself. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we are at time, and I will let you sign off here shortly. But once again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Loved your presentation. Loved our brief discussion at the end. I will highlight here on your screen, everybody, if you need to get in touch, Amanda has her contact information on the bottom right of the screen, and feel more than happy to get in touch with her. If there are any other questions that we didn't get to, we will make sure to filter those through to her. You can always connect with her on LinkedIn and also get in touch with her that way. We are not even midway through here. We're second round and moving on to third. So we appreciate you for joining us once again. We'll see you again in about 13 or so minutes. So thanks again, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.